Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Megan Kopp. I'm a certified holistic health coach and the owner of Rockstart Wellness. This is my very first Nutrition 101 webinar. This is going to be split up into two parts. Part one is going to be about the basics of nutrition, talking your macronutrients and your micronutrients, the great food debates, and whether supplementation is a good idea and whether you need it, and certain special populations where dietary concerns need to be taken into account. And part two is about our food system, how it got the way it is today, the toxicity of our food system, and how there is a better way. So just real quick, because a lot of you don't know me, I received my certification for holistic health coaching in September of 2014, and I am going to be launching my business, Rockstart Wellness, at the beginning of November. I'm going to have a website, newsletter, Facebook page, and all that good stuff. I decided to become a health coach after I battled with an eating disorder and all the nasty stuff that came along with it. And I looked back on it and I said, you know, I probably could have gotten through this a lot easier, a lot faster, and with a lot more confidence if I had had somebody supporting me and guiding me through the process. And I realized that I had a real passion, not just for nutrition, but also for holistic living. Holistic living means to take into account every aspect of health. That means not just your diet and your exercise, but also your relationships, your career, your sleep, your level of self-care, and of course your spirituality. I incorporated all of those things just sort of instinctively during my journey through my eating disorder and out of it, and I continue on that journey. And so when I found out about the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, how they were using the same holistic approach that I had adopted naturally, I said, yeah, this is my deal. So signed up for their program. I went through a year of training. I studied over 100 different dietary theories, and I got my certification this past September. So the reason that I'm doing this webinar for you today is because there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of confusing information, a lot of conflicting information out there about diet and nutrition. And of course there's going to be, because not everybody is the same and not every body is the same. So there are people who are considering a vegan diet versus a paleo diet, people who are trying to figure out if they want to try a Mediterranean diet or the Okinawan diet. You know, do they want to take a look at the blood type diet or maybe Ayurvedic diet? So there's a lot of different theories out there. I know, I studied them all. So I want to clear up some of the information around just the basic necessities that everybody needs in their diet. I'm talking about fuel and nutrients, and it's pretty straightforward. Then I'm going to dive into the great food debates. That's the sugars, the fats, and dairy. Move into when supplementation is a great idea and when it's not necessarily, well, not necessary. And then, of course, like I said earlier, some special populations. So I got a nice little slideshow for you. I'm going to pop on over to that, and then I'm going to switch to screen share mode. So let's do that right now. Sorry, forgive my technical ineptitude. I'm still learning how this all works. Oh, there it goes. Okay, so here is the beginning of the webinar. Okay, so Rockstart Wellness, that's me, sole proprietor, and this is Nutrition 101 webinar part one. What's the scoop? Like I said, basics of food, the great food debates, supplementation, and special dietary considerations. Part two is going to be in a totally separate video, and like I said, it's going to be about our current system, how it got that way and why it's so flawed, toxicity of our diet, and how there is a better way. That'll be in part two. So if you want to check that out, I'll be posting that hopefully within the next couple of days. So let's get started. What is food? Well, food is fuel, but it's also the means of how we obtain our nutrients. These are your macronutrients, which is protein, fats, and carbohydrates, and your micronutrients. These are your vitamins and your minerals. I want to start off with one of the most important macronutrients, which is protein. So what is protein? In a chemical sense, it is polymer chains of amino acids. What they are is the building blocks for your tissues. They're precursors to DNA, coenzymes, and hormones, and they function as part of your immune response, your cellular repair, and your blood cell formation. There are 9 amino acids needed for a complete protein. These are called essential amino acids, and what that means is that your body cannot naturally synthesize them or create them inside your body. They have to come from an outside source, which would be food. Sources of protein, commonly known as animal foods, meat, fish, eggs, and dairy. But for my vegan and vegetarian friends, you can also get proteins from plant foods, such as legumes, which are beans, peanuts, chickpeas. Yes, peanuts are a legume, not a nut. Also come from nuts and seeds, and some grains do have some great proteins. You've got your combination proteins, corn and beans, soybeans and rice, red beans and rice. What this means is that corn alone, soybeans alone, red beans alone, and rice alone do not have those 9 essential amino acids that I just told you about. But if you combine these foods together, you get those 9 essential amino acids through those combinations. So the general guidelines for protein intake is 46 grams a day for women, 56 grams a day for men. If you want to find out exactly how much protein your body needs, the basic calculation is 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of your body weight. And there are all kinds of online calculators for converting pounds into kilograms. If you're an athlete, though, this guideline raises by quite a bit. In fact, it doubles, especially for athletes that do a lot of heavy lifting, or a lot of high intensity interval training. Now, if you are an athlete and you want to know your protein guidelines, I would highly suggest consulting a sports nutritionist or a personal trainer who has a lot of experience in sports nutrition. They'll be able to give you a better idea for what your body needs for the type of activity and the type of sport that you're doing. So do your research on that. General guideline, there's usually about 7 grams of protein per ounce of meat. That includes beef, poultry, and fish. And there's about 6 grams of protein per large egg. Plant protein quantities can vary widely. Not all plant proteins have the same amount of protein per quantity. So make sure if you're going to live on a plant-based diet or a heavily plant-based diet, please do your research and make sure that you're getting enough protein, especially those 9 essential amino acids. Next up, the skinny on fats. Now, what are fats? Chemically, they are chains of fatty acids. You can identify short chain fatty acids because they're liquid at room temperature. These are things like oils. And long chain fatty acids, which are solid at room temperature. These are things like butter, coconut oil, lard, anything that you put out on the counter and it doesn't melt, that's a long chain fatty acid, and it's usually animal fats. Fat is actually the body's preferred energy source. It also assists in metabolizing fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K, which I'll talk about a little bit later. They help to form the structure of all your cells in what's known as the lipid bilayer. The 2 essential fatty acids, essential again, meaning that your body can't make them itself. It needs to take them in from an outside source, which would be food, is omega-3 and omega-6. And these 2 fatty acids provide the guidelines for your body's inflammatory responses. Fat is also necessary for your cognitive functions, and it can be converted to glucose by the liver. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. First thing up, saturated fat does not make you fat. And I'm going to talk more about this later and show you a quick little cute video about this that'll explain the process a little bit better. 2 types of fats. One is saturated. That's usually animal fats, like I said earlier, and some plant fats, especially tropical plants like coconut and palm kernel oil. And then you've got 2 types of unsaturated fats. These are your monounsaturated, which can be found in peanut butter, olives and olive oil, nuts, seeds, and their oils, also in avocado and avocado oil, and polyunsaturated fats, which are found in walnuts, flaxseed, pumpkin and sunflower seeds, and a lot of other different sources. If you want some more sources, Google it up. You can get that kind of information from just about anywhere on the internet now. Now, those 2 different type of omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids I was telling you about, omega-6 fatty acids invoke an inflammatory response, which means that your tissues swell up. So like when you twist your ankle or you get a cut and the area gets real puffy, that's an inflammatory response. And that's actually necessary because it assists in the healing process. It speeds the white blood cells and red blood cells to the area, and it helps the wound repair itself. So you do want a certain level of inflammatory response in your body. Omega-3 fatty acids invoke an anti-inflammatory response. That's when they come in and make sure that your tissues are not in a constant inflammatory state, which is also known as chronic systemic inflammation. Chronic systemic inflammation can lead to a lot of nasty stuff, such as cardiovascular disease, rheumatoid diseases such as rheumatoid arthritis. It can also be, it's been found to be a culprit in diabetes and a bunch of other stuff. Again, lots of research available on the internet for this if you want to know more about it. Now, the issue with omega-6 fatty acids is that it's found in vegetable and seed oils, which are the primary oils used in the vast majority of processed foods. I'm talking about your shelf-stable stuff like baked goods, cookies, crackers, chips, pastries and things like that. The ideal ratio of omega-6 intake to omega-3 intake in your diet is 3:1. But because we have so much processed food in our diet, our current average intake ratio is actually 16:1. Having that high of an intake of omega-6 actually creates that chronic systemic inflammation I was talking about. And that's why we see all of these so-called diseases of civilization, like diabetes, like arthritis, like cardiovascular disease. It's because of all of these vegetable and seed oils used in those processed foods. Now, if you want to make sure that you're getting the best sources of fat in your diet, if you eat animal products, you'll want to go for grass-fed, pastured, and wild caught. Now, grass-fed means that cows ate grass, not grain products, that chickens were out foraging in grass and eating bugs and things like that. And your fish, excuse me, your fish was wild caught on the line, not raised in a farm and eating soy pellets and all kinds of nasty stuff. These sources of fat are best because they're the most natural and they're going to be the most balanced and nutrient dense. Excuse me, goodness. If you're vegan or vegetarian, or if you prefer to follow a plant-based diet with no animal products, you can get your great fats from flaxseed, olives and olive oil, and coconut oil. These are some of the best plant fats. There are also some other really great ones out there. Again, Google it up. If you want to get those omega-3s in, get them from fatty fish like salmon, sardines, herring, tuna, trout, and catfish. You can also get these for flaxseed and walnuts. Your omega-6s come from poultry, eggs, avocado, nuts, and those vegetable oils that I was telling you about, and I don't recommend that you get those. There's a lot of reasons I don't recommend vegetable oils, and I'll cover that in part 2 of the webinar. Again, with the omega-6s, you want to go easy on these, because if you get a lot of them through processed foods, you're probably getting way more than you need already. So don't increase your poultry and your avocado intake if you're still eating these highly processed packaged foods. You're going to overload on omega-6, and you don't want that. Lions and tigers and carbs. Carbs are not the enemy, despite what a lot of people may say. And I will get into more of this later. Carbohydrate is not considered essential, meaning that the body doesn't make it itself, because the body synthesizes glucose, which is the broken down form of carbohydrates, from the proteins and fats that you get in your diet in a process called gluconeogenesis. This takes place in the liver. If you're an organic chemistry geek and a biology and biochemistry geek like I am, check out this process. It's totally fascinating. But if you're like most people and you couldn't care less about that, just know that your liver can actually take the proteins and fats in your diet and create glucose, which is basically blood sugar, and use that glucose to fuel the necessary systems. Now, the carb sources that we are commonly told that we need to eat are breads and pastas and things like that. And again, I'll get more into why this is not necessarily a good idea. But some of the other carb sources, such as vegetables and fruits especially, come with needed dietary fiber, which is necessary for digestive health, and micronutrients, which is seriously important. You do not want to be nutrient deficient, and you'll find out why in a little while. Is butter a carb? No, it's not. But I will give 100 cool points to anybody who can catch the movie reference on that. So what are carbohydrates? Chemically, they're saccharides, which is just a fancy word for sugar. And there's 3 types. There's monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. And that classification is really just to describe their molecular structure. They all break down into the same thing, which is glucose. And glucose is your body's immediate fuel source. If you've ever heard the term carb loading, a lot of endurance athletes like long distance runners, cross-country skiers, anybody that's doing something at a steady state for a long period of time, they do this thing called carb loading, because the carbohydrate breaks down into glucose, and that is an immediate fuel source. And you'll see that these athletes also continually fuel themselves with additional carbohydrate to continue fueling their activity. Any glucose that isn't used immediately is moved into storage into the tissues as glycogen, and this is only very temporary. Any unused glycogen that's stored in your tissues gets converted to fat. Yes, you can turn sugar into fat. And I've got a cute little kind of goofy, lot of fun video to show you. It's called Why You Got Fat. You can look this up on YouTube. Username is Fathead Movie. Fathead Movie is actually pretty fascinating. If you want to watch the whole thing, it's actually available on YouTube. But I'm just going to show you a quick 3-minute clip. So let me go back over here to screen share mode. Oh, it looks like I'm still on screen share. I'm going to take it off of screen share really quick. And oh, wait, it's not letting me. And there we go. Okay. It's a really cool little movie. I'm just going to show you a 3-minute clip about the process that I just talked about, how your body converts sugar into fat. So hopefully this will work. It didn't work last time, so I'm hoping that it works this time. All right, so hit play.
Most of us think we only put fat in our fat cells when we eat too much. But as Gary Taubes explains in Good Calories, Bad Calories, your fat cells are like rechargeable fuel cells. Every time you eat, you store some fat. In between meals, fat comes out of your fat cells to provide the fuel for your muscles and organs. If you're naturally thin, it's because you have efficient fat cells. Fat goes in quickly and it comes out easily. Your body doesn't need much fat because the little bit of fat you do have is a reliable source of fuel. If you're predisposed to be fat, it's because you have greedy fat cells. When you eat, you tend to store calories as fat instead of burning them. And when your other tissues need those calories, the fat comes out slowly if it comes out at all. What are they doing? Did one of you guys forget to pay the food bill? Are you going to eat all that?
The end user of food that we eat are our individual cells. And it doesn't matter if it goes in our mouth. If it doesn't get to those cells, we starve. We starve at the cellular level.
And so you do exactly what your body is telling you to do.
Come on, eat something. A steak, will ya?
You eat more. In other words, you're not getting fat because you're eating more. You're eating more because you're getting fat. Most of us weren't born with greedy fat cells, but we can certainly make them that way. When you eat too many carbohydrates, you raise your blood sugar. Since high blood sugar is toxic, your body releases insulin to bring it down. But your body can only burn a little bit of sugar at a time. So what happens to the rest of it?
Your storage sites for carbohydrate are limited, and we've got unlimited storage places for fat. So the body ends up just converting the carbohydrate to fat.
And after bringing down your blood sugar, insulin does its other job. It tells your body to store fat. When you have a healthy metabolism, it only takes a little bit of insulin to bring your blood sugar down, and then everything goes back to normal. But over time, that can change.
The cells can become resistant to the effects of insulin. In essence, when that happens, insulin's talking, but the cells just start listening. And so they don't get the message from insulin, so they don't do what they're supposed to do.
Hello? Stop hitting me. I'm not hitting you. Stop hitting me. I'm not hitting you.
And so your body does what it has to do. It starts producing more insulin.
You finally reach the point to where your insulin's high just to keep your sugar normal, even if you're not eating any sugar. And then when that happens, then it's starting to drive stuff into the fat cell, and you've reached this point where all of a sudden, bam, you get fat.
Fathead, yeah, I'm gonna start thinking smarter.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so did that make sense? Hang on a second, sorry. That's the Fathead movie playing in the background there. Okay, let me go back to screen share. Oh, wait, not yet. Sorry, please forgive my technical ineptitude. Okay, so did that process make sense? You take a lot of sugar into your body. It's not used for immediate, not used as an immediate fuel source. So your body releases insulin to control the blood sugar that's in your body, because too much blood sugar, as the video said, is toxic. That's why diabetics need to take insulin shots, because they need to make sure that it keeps their blood sugar low so that they don't die from it. So you've got insulin being kicked out, and it's telling the sugar where to go, and if it's not being used up, it then tells it to go into your fat cells and store itself as fat. Now, why does fat get stored? Because it is a sustainable energy source, and like the video just said, we can't hang on to sugar in our bodies. We don't have any place to put it. So if we don't use it, we've got to convert it into a storable form, which is fat. Now, as long as you're on board with fat don't make you fat, sugar makes you fat, are we all on board? All right. So let me go back over to the presentation here, and okay. So now I want to move on to the micronutrients. These are your vitamins and your minerals. Now, if proteins and fats are the structure of your cells, vitamins and minerals are the basic components of your cell function, meaning your cells may have shape and they may have structures, but they can't do anything. It's sort of kind of the equivalent of not having any oil in your engine, or transmission fluid in your transmission pan, or brake fluid in your brake system, things like that. The fuel, the energy that you get from food, functions as the gas for your car, but all the other lubricants and little transition things, all the things that tell your car's little parts what to do and how to work, that's what your vitamins and minerals do. They're vital for the formation, maintenance, and repair of every single cell in your body. Every single cell in your body, and you have billions of them. So if you've got a micronutrient deficiency, which it's not terribly common in more developed countries, it really happens in only underdeveloped or in developing countries, but it can occur in prosperous countries. And I'll talk about this a little bit more when I talk about vitamin supplementation, and also in part 2 of the webinar when I talk about how our food system is essentially totally stripped of nutrients from the ground all the way to our mouths. Getting enough vitamins, it's as simple as eating the alphabet. There's am I doing the right? Am I figure 5 or 6? Vitamins A, B, C, D, E, and K. So that's 6 essential vitamins that you'll want to get. Vitamin A, it's one of those fat-soluble vitamins. I know that I mentioned that when I was talking about fats. You have to have fat in your diet so that your body can metabolize fat-soluble vitamins, and vitamin A is one of them. Vitamin A includes retinol, carotenoids, and beta-carotene, which, as you know, is found very heavily in carrots. Vitamin A helps to maintain your immune system. It supports your vision, and it's very important for growth and development, especially in kids. Now, the RDA recommended daily allowance is 700 micrograms a day for women and 900 micrograms a day for men. You can find vitamin A in animal livers, also in dandelion greens, sweet potatoes, carrots, kale, spinach, pumpkin, and collard greens. A very basic way of knowing that you're getting enough vitamin A is to eat orange and yellow and red colored vegetables. These tend to have quite a bit of vitamin A. Vitamin B, this is actually a group of vitamins which is composed of 7 separate vitamins. That's B1, B2, B3, B6, B7, B9, and B12. I've included their technical names right next to them. So if you're looking at like a food label, or if you're looking at a supplements label, that's what each one of those vitamins are. Now, B vitamins as a whole are vital in your DNA and RNA function, your nerve function, energy productions, metabolic reactions, things like cell division, red blood cell production, a lot of really important bodily functions. You can find B vitamins in turkey, tuna, liver, legumes, potatoes, banana, chili peppers, tempeh, which I believe is some form of tofu. I honestly don't know. I don't touch the stuff. So if anybody wants to clear up what exactly tempeh is, I'd be really grateful. And you can also find vitamin B in molasses. Now, vegans especially need to supplement with vitamin B12 because you cannot get B12 from plant sources. So if you are vegan, make sure you're getting supplementary B12 because you need that. Like, you need it pretty bad. You may have heard that pregnant women need extra folic acid. They need to supplement with folic acid, or they need to eat folic acid heavy foods. This helps to avoid neural tube defects like spina bifida in the growing baby. So if you're pregnant or thinking about becoming pregnant, make sure you're getting plenty of folic acid in your diet. Up next is vitamin C. This is probably the most well-known vitamin. Everybody knows about it. Everybody knows where it comes from, but they're not entirely sure what it is. It is a cofactor in enzymatic reactions, including collagen synthesis. So it's really important for the formation of your skin your tissues, and your bones. Yes, there's collagen in your bones. Vitamin C, as everybody know, also helps to support your immune system. Now, you want to get enough vitamin C, but not more than 2,000 milligrams a day. Excessive intake, excessive intake of vitamin C really causes a lot of digestive problems like stomach upset and diarrhea and things like that. But there are some toxic side effects of vitamin C. So if you're supplementing with it, make sure you're not getting more than 2,000 milligrams a day total from both your supplement and from the food that you're eating. The RDA is 75 milligrams a day for women and 90 milligrams a day for men. You can find these in kiwi, which is my absolute favorite way to get vitamin C. Also in broccoli, Brussels sprouts, lychee, which is an Asian fruit, papaya, strawberry, orange and lemon, as you know, are the citrus fruits, as well as grapefruit. Also found in pineapple, cauliflower, kale, cantaloupe, garlic, interestingly enough, raspberry, spinach, and mango. So there's vitamin C is found in a lot of really great plant foods. If you are deficient in vitamin C, you're going to get yourself some scurvy. I'm not going to describe what scurvy is, but if you were curious enough to look it up, enjoy that. It ain't pretty. All right, vitamin D is another fat-soluble vitamin. It enhances the absorption of calcium, iron, magnesium phosphate, and zinc. Now, you've probably seen a lot of milk saying on the label that it's been fortified with vitamin D. This is because it's important for the absorption of calcium and magnesium, which is what helps to create your bones. So they say drink your milk, it's good for your bones. That's why. It's important for building and maintaining bones, and it affects your neuromuscular and your immune function. There are two forms of vitamin D. There's ergocalciferol, which is D2, and cholecalciferol, which is D3. Now, here's the thing. The body synthesizes enough vitamin D from your cholesterol through exposure to sunlight. In other words, if you want to make sure you're getting enough vitamin D, just make sure you're getting enough sunlight. And there's more than one reason to get enough sunlight outside of the vitamin D, but this is the main reason. And the best way to get it is to spend anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes in direct sunlight, meaning you don't have clothes covering yourself from neck to toes. You don't have yourself slathered in sunscreen. We're talking direct, right on the skin, no sunscreen in the middle, exposure to sunlight. Now, if you've got very fair or sensitive skin, you can do this in very tiny doses, a couple of minutes at a time. If you have darker or less sensitive skin, you can do this all in one big go, 20 to 30 minutes, or even more. Sometimes darker skin people need more sunlight simply because they have the darker skin. If you want to try getting your vitamin D through food sources, you can find D2 in mushrooms, and you can find D3 in a lot of fish products like cod liver oil, cooked salmon and mackerel, tuna and sardines that have been canned in oil, and you can also get it from cooked beef liver and cooked egg yolks. I still recommend getting your vitamin D from the sun. It's a whole lot easier, and your body's getting more than enough. Next up, vitamin E. This is yet another fat-soluble vitamin. It is composed of tocopherols and tocotrienols or trienols. Honestly, not sure how to pronounce that. Vitamin E is a powerful antioxidant. Just to take a quick step aside, what is an antioxidant? Well, it helps to rid your body of the free radicals that are created by cell oxidation. Now, if you want to know what that is, think about putting a metal object outside and letting it be exposed to the elements like air, like moisture, like dirt. What happens to this metal object if it's not specially treated against that is it starts to rust. It gets orange, it gets flaky, and that's what is happening to the metal because it's oxidizing. Now imagine that same process happening in your cells. So free radicals are basically the product of like cell rust. And free radicals do a lot of nasty, nasty damage. You don't want them hanging around in your body. So you want to be taking in enough antioxidants to help rid your body of these free radicals, and vitamin E is one of them. It also affects gene expression. Now, this is a big deal because we have genes in our DNA that are turned on or off depending on the environment they're in. Now, there's a really big scientific explanation as to how this works, and it's way too detailed for me to get into something as general as this topic, but if you want to check it out, lots and lots of resources online. Fascinating subject. You want to try to get no more than 1,000 milligrams of vitamin E a day, and the RDA is 15 milligrams a day. You can find it in sunflower, almond, palm, olive, nut, and sesame oils. You can also find it in nuts, leafy greens, avocados, asparagus, kiwi, again, broccoli, pumpkin, sweet potato, mango, tomato, and papaya. Do a lot more research if you want to find some more sources of vitamin E for any of these vitamins, any of these minerals, actually. Do lots of research. All right, and the last one is vitamin K. This is yet another fat-soluble vitamin. Once again, make sure you're getting plenty of fat in your diet. Vitamin K is important in blood coagulation and blood-bone calcium binding regulation. That means it essentially makes sure that you don't have too much calcium in your blood, and also that your bones aren't calcifying too heavily. Recommended daily intake is 90 micrograms a day for women and 120 micrograms a day for men. Now, this changes when it comes to kids. So if you got little ones around the house, it's 10 to 20 micrograms a day for infants, and anywhere from 15 to 100 micrograms a day for kids and teens. If you need age-specific ranges, Google it up. There are two different types of vitamin K. There's K1 and K2. You can find K1 in leafy greens. You can also find it in asparagus, and well, asparagus, that seems to be the only non-leafy green on the list. You can find K2 in cheeses, egg yolk, butter, and chicken liver. And for my non-animal product eating friends, you can find K2 in a substance called natto. That's N-A-T-T-O. It's some kind of fermented soybean product. I've never tasted it before, and it looks interesting to say the least. But if you're looking for a great source of K2, that's probably one of the big powerhouses of it, as far as getting it from a plant source. So check that out if you're interested. All right, so moving on to the minerals category. Now, there are big minerals, which are known as macro minerals. I call them big minerals just because, well, it's makes more sense to me than saying macro. The first one is probably the most well-known of your macro minerals, calcium. It's a bone builder. It functions in neurotransmitter release, which means the messages that are sent across your neurons in your brain and throughout your body. It also assists in muscle contraction. You can find calcium, obviously, in dairy products, as we all know, but you can also find them in nuts and seeds, blackstrap molasses, beans, figs, quinoa, which is another complete protein for my, my plant diet friends. You can get it in broccoli, kale, and dandelion greens, and the RDA is 1,000 milligrams a day of calcium. Phosphorus, this is a lesser known mineral, but you absolutely need it. It's important in the structural framework of cells and DNA and RNA. It assists in cellular energy transport, and it helps to harden bones as calcium phosphate salts. Make sure that your bones aren't all rubbery, but they're also not brittle, so that they're subject to breaking easily. You can find phosphorus in all foods containing protein and calcium. Recommended RDA is 700 milligrams a day for healthy adults. Deficiency will lead to muscle and neurological dysfunction, and an overdose leads to diarrhea, calcification of organs and soft tissues, and it interferes with your iron, calcium, magnesium, and zinc absorption. So you want to make sure you're getting just enough phosphorus, but not too much. It's all about balance, folks. Next up, magnesium. This is required for catalytic action in energy storage and release. It assists in the synthesis of DNA and RNA. Basically put, you need magnesium. You can find magnesium in spices, nuts, cocoa, and veggies, especially leafy greens. You don't need a whole lot of it, 270 milligrams a day for women and 300 milligrams a day for men. Sodium, this is another one of the more well-known minerals. It helps to regulate blood volume and blood pressure, and it maintains osmotic equilibrium, which means the balance of water within your cells and without your cells, and your pH levels in the body. That means whether your body is an acidic state or an alkaline state. And I won't get into what that means here. Google it up if you're curious. Sodium, as we all know, is most commonly ingested in the form of common table salt. The daily RDA is 2.3 grams a day, but most people consume up to 10 grams a day. That's like 5 times as much RDA for sodium, because we get it in a lot of processed foods. Salt is a wonderful, wonderful preservative, and we need preservatives in shelf-stable foods. Why? Because otherwise they go rancid, they get spoiled, and nobody buys them, they don't last very long. So they use a lot of sodium in highly processed foods, especially in things like pre-cooked frozen entrees. The sodium content of these things is just like through the roof. You want to be careful with your sodium intake, because too much of it has been known to raise blood pressure, and there's a huge debate about this. So if you want to get the real lowdown on sodium and how it affects your blood pressure, make sure that you, again, Google it up, do your own research. but make sure you're getting enough, but not too much. Balance again. And the last of the big minerals is potassium. It is responsible for hormone secretion and action, vascular tone, systemic blood pressure control, gastrointestinal motility, acid-base homeostasis, glucose and insulin metabolism, and fluid and electrolyte balance. Now, why did I tell you all that? Because I want you to understand how important potassium is for your diet. You can find potassium in all fruits, veggies, and meats, but most especially fish, yam, parsley, dried apricots, chocolate nuts, potatoes, bamboo shoots, bananas, avocados, coconut water, soybeans, and bran. Recommended RDA is 4,700 milligrams a day, 5,100 milligrams a day if you are a nursing mom. If you are lacking in potassium, again, you will have high blood pressure because sodium and potassium help to balance each other out. So, all right, let's move on to what I like to call the little minerals. These are also known as trace minerals. I would say one of the most important is copper. When I was doing my research on copper, I didn't realize just how many functions in the body and in your cells copper is a part of. I'm not going to read the entire list, but we'll just put it this way. Copper does a lot of different things. So you need to make sure that you're getting enough of it from your diet. If you don't have enough copper in your diet, its absorption can be hindered by an excess of both iron and zinc. These minerals, these macro minerals and your trace minerals all help to balance each other out. Recommended RDA is 900 micrograms a day for adults, 1 to 1.3 milligrams a day for pregnant and nursing women. Double check that with your doctor if you are pregnant or trying to become pregnant, or if you're nursing. It's largely based on how much copper you're actually getting through your diet. You can find it in seafood, especially shellfish. Also find it in liver and other organ meats, and there is a lot of other sources of copper. It can also be leached into drinking water through copper piping. Copper is a very, very common metal used for piping because it doesn't deteriorate, but it can leach a little bit of copper into your drinking water. So you may actually be getting more copper in your diet than you think just by drinking water from copper pipe taps. A little bit more on copper. Make sure that if you decide to supplement with copper that you're only doing so under medical supervision. This is really big important. Like I said, you don't want to have too much copper in your body. A deficiency of it leads to osteoporosis, osteoarthritis, colon cancer, and diseases and chronic conditions with bone, connective tissue, heart, and blood vessels. An overdose can lead to upset stomach, nausea, and diarrhea, but it can also cause tissue damage and disease. So copper is real big important. And if you want more information about copper and intake, make sure you consult a dietitian or a nutritionist, or talk to your doctor, especially if you're pregnant or nursing. Next up is iodine. It is crucial to the formation and function of the thyroid, which is a tiny butterfly-shaped organ that basically wraps around your esophagus. And that little teeny membrane is important for the regulation of your metabolism, as well as a lot of other different functions in your body, especially the release and the regulation and the creation of hormones. The recommended RDA is 150 micrograms per day in healthy adults. This number goes up if you are a pregnant or a nursing mom. Again, check with your OBGYN. You can find iodine in seafood, dairy products, and eggs, but you most commonly find iodine in iodized salt. So there is very, very little chance of having an iodine deficiency if you're eating enough salt, because almost all salt is iodized sort of by default. But if you are not buying iodized salt, make sure that you're getting plenty of iodine through seafood, dairy products, or eggs. And if you don't eat animal products, you can get it through dulce granules. These are available at health food stores. I like to sprinkle them into one of my favorite dishes, salmon chowder. It gives it a nice sea-like taste. I feel like I'm eating a little piece of the ocean in a good way. So make sure you're getting enough iodine, because a deficiency can lead to hypothyroidism, which is also an autoimmune condition, so don't get those two confused. It can lead to goiter formation, and it can lead to intellectual disability in children. This is very common in underdeveloped or developing countries, especially goiter. And an overdose, which is highly uncommon, usually occurs in the presence of selenium deficiency, which I'll talk about next. Selenium is a cofactor in thyroid function. You can find it in nuts, cereals, meat, mushrooms, fish, eggs, kidney, tuna, crab, and lobster, but Brazil nuts are the richest source of selenium, and 1 a day is more than enough because Selenium is toxic above 400 micrograms a day. That is not a lot at all. Deficiency in selenium is extremely rare, and it's usually tied to a high mercury intake through high mercury fish and or a low vitamin E intake. So once again, make sure you're getting plenty of vitamin E. Selenium poisoning of water can actually occur when agricultural runoff flows through dry, undeveloped land. And the reason that I bring this up is because I want you to understand that the way that we farm and raise and produce our food does affect our nutrition. It affects our health, it affects the environment. And I'm gonna get way more into that in part 2 of the webinar. So stick around and watch part 2 if you are interested in hearing a lot more about that. I promise, it's fascinating stuff. Finally, zinc. This is another mineral that I honestly didn't really give a lot of consideration to until I realized just how many functions it's important in. I'm not going to read the whole list, but if you'd like to read through it, what you really need to take away from this is zinc is big time important. It's stored in the body, primarily in the brain, muscles, bones, kidney, and liver, but it's concentrated in parts of the eye, and in men, it's concentrated in the prostate. You can find zinc in oysters, red meat, and liver, beans, nuts, whole grains, and sunflower seeds for my vegan and vegetarian friends. General RDA is 8 milligrams a day for women, 11 milligrams a day for men, but I've read in multiple reliable sources that 15 milligrams a day is your best bet for zinc. Once again, you want to be careful because it's toxic above 20 to 40 milligrams a day, depending on your body and how it functions and how much zinc you get in your diet. It will affect your copper and your iron function absorption above 100 milligrams a day. Deficiency in zinc leads to malabsorption of other nutrients, chronic liver disease, chronic renal disease, sickle cell anemia, and diabetes. You don't want to be deficient in zinc. Now, let's move on to those topics that I told you I'd talk about later, the great food debates. And I want to start with sugar. Why? Because it's probably the hottest debated topic in nutrition. From low carb diets to high carb diets to in the middle diets to processed sugar is bad for you to all sugar is bad for you to all carbohydrates are bad for you. Let me tell you something, folks. Carbs are not the enemy. You do need carbohydrate in your diet. You do need it in your body, just not from the sources that you've been told you need it from, and not nearly in the amounts that you've been told you need it. Like I said, the body can actually synthesize carbohydrate on its own. It can turn protein and fats into glucose, blood sugar, through a process in the liver called gluconeogenesis. Now, we keep being told that we need huge amounts of carbohydrate in our diet, which we don't. And this is another thing that I'll get way more into in part 2 of the webinar. So if you want to know more about why we keep being told to eat so much carbohydrate, and especially from these bread and pasta and cookie and cracker sources, stick around and hang out for part 2 of the webinar. Sugar has been scientifically proven to activate the same center in the brain as cocaine. It is an addictive substance. Make no mistake about it. Sugar is an addictive substance. So up until this point, I haven't told you what to eat or what not to eat or how much of it to eat. Here is where I'm going to tell you what to eat and what not to eat. Why? Because these are general health guidelines that anybody should follow for general good health. So you want to avoid white refined sugar and white refined flour, high fructose corn syrup, which is extraordinarily processed. And if you want to see how it's processed, you can YouTube that all you want. It grossed me out. And of course, artificial sweeteners. Now we want to stay away from artificial sweeteners. Why? Because they are chemicals and you don't want to be putting chemicals into your body. More on that in part 2. You want to get natural sugars in your diet from fruits, sweet vegetables like sweet potatoes, and natural sweeteners like honey and maple syrup. I absolutely adore maple syrup, and I keep a jar of raw honey in my cabinet at all times. Now, up next in the great food debates is fat. Now, why do you think fat has been so hotly debated? Well, it goes back to this little study done by a guy named Ancel Keys called the 7-Country Study. Now, I will be getting into this again in part 2 of the webinar because I want to keep this short and sweet and I don't want to overwhelm you and take too much of your time. But the whole idea that fat makes you fat was based on this study. And as you have now seen and as I've explained, excess blood glucose caused by excess carbohydrate consumption plus not using that blood glucose via immediate intense activity gets stored as body fat. Now, I hope you understand that. Fat don't make you fat, sugar makes you fat. You know what else makes you fat? Combining a diet of fatty foods with a diet high in refined carbohydrates. That is a serious health disaster in the making, because if you got dietary fat coming in along with those refined carbs, and those refined carbs are being converted into fat, and you're putting more fat in on top of it, not only are you going to have even higher cases of obesity, but you're going to have a lot more health problems, especially cardiovascular disease and diabetes and chronic systemic inflammation, things like rheumatoid arthritis. You're just going to have nasty, nasty stuff going on. You do not want to combine a high fat diet with a high refined carb diet. Omega-6 fats, like I talked about earlier, promote inflammation. You want to consume as little omega-6 fats from processed foods as possible, because even a few things of processed food will give you a big time overdose of omega-6 fats just by themselves. That doesn't even count the good sources of omega-6 you're getting, like the poultry, like egg yolks. You want to avoid vegetable and seed oils and anything on a food label that says hydrogenated. If you want to know what hydrogenation means, once again, go ahead and check that out on YouTube or Wikipedia or whatever reliable website you decide to use. But you want to stay away from that just because they're so highly processed and because they contain so much that omega-6 fat. You want to consume whole dairy. That means full fat dairy, none of the 2%, none of the 0%. You want the good fat that whole dairy comes from, and you want to get it from those grass-fed sources like I was talking about. You want to get it from nut and seed oils that are either cold pressed or expeller pressed. This is the best way to keep the oil itself intact without processing it too much. Get it from tropical oils such as coconut, palm kernel, and cocoa butter, and from animal fats if you consume animal products. Make sure those animal fats have been grass-fed beef and dairy, pastured eggs, chicken and pork, and wild-caught fish and shellfish. And a little side on that dairy, if you can get your dairy raw, absolutely go for it. And I'm going to talk about that right now. Dairy is largely a personal choice. Now, if you're lactose intolerant, of course, don't eat the stuff. If you want to take lactate supplements or drink lactate milk or whatever it is you lactose folks and lactose intolerant folks decide to do, then go for it. But otherwise, stay away from the stuff, because you just don't need the pain and suffering that comes along with it. If you do decide to go with dairy, like myself, make sure you're sourcing your dairy products from organic, grass-fed places. This way you get the most nutrient dense and you get the highest quality products. Raw dairy is even better. It's awesome if you can get it. There have been a lot of fears about raw milk and its sale, and it's been banned in a lot of states and a lot of counties across the United States and even in parts of the world. Unfortunately, these fears are largely based on old processing practices. Before we had things like pasteurization, before we had things like homogenization, before we had entities like the USDA and the FDA and all of these governing bodies making sure that food processing places were keeping their equipment clean and keeping their animals clean, keeping themselves clean, handling and storing these products properly, we ended up with a lot of contaminated food. So the fears about raw milk are largely based on these old fears that have been hanging around in America's consciousness for decades. If you have a clean farm and healthy animals and you utilize proper handling and storage techniques, it dramatically reduces the contamination of these dairy products. This is a choice. If you want to use raw milk, absolutely go for it, rock on with your bad self. If you choose to stick with pasteurized dairy products, then that's fine, nothing wrong with it. You're just not going to get quite the benefits of dairy products that you would get from raw milk. Especially important, know your dairy farmer. Hell, know all of your farmers. Talk to the guys at the farmers market, talk to the guys behind the counter at the, in the meat section, in the fish section, talk to these guys, know where your food is coming from. And I will say that across the board, know where your food is coming from, where it came from, how it was treated, how it was processed, how it was raised. It's important to know these food sources. And again, if you want to know more about why, check out part 2 of the webinar. So we're getting close to the end here. I'm going to wrap this up as quickly as I can. Supplements. Are they a waste of money? In some cases, yes. If you are a generally healthy adult with a fairly, let me rephrase that, with a good healthy diet, and you're getting enough of these foods that I just listed out for your macronutrients and your micronutrients, you're probably getting more than enough nutrition. Certain medical conditions do require supplementation these are usually done under a doctor's supervision. Vegans and sometimes vegetarians, especially strict vegetarians, need that supplemental B12 like I was talking about earlier, because you cannot get B12 from plant sources. You've got to get it from an animal source. But if you're not eating an animal source, you got to supplement with that B12. Now, all that being said, even the best foods can be nutritionally deplete. Now, why is this? Really briefly, the factory farming processes that a vast majority of our food comes from strips the soil of nutrients, which keeps the nutrients out of the food itself. It then goes on to be heavily processed, which further strips nutrients. And then the nutrients are added back artificially, chemically, because they have to be. Otherwise, every single food product on our shelves, with the exception of like real food like meat and vegetables and fruits and things like that, would be totally nutritionally devoid, and we would all be dying of malnutrition. But even the best foods can be nutritionally deplete because these farming practices have made their way into our food system so deeply. They're so finely ingrained in there that even if you're eating whole foods and real foods and even organic foods, you can still have some nutritional depletion. But if you choose to supplement, make sure that you're always buying the best that you can afford. The types of supplements that you're using, these could be nutritional supplements like micronutrients, fish oils, antioxidants. They could be weight loss supplements like shakes, bars, metabolic enhancers, appetite suppressants. They can be training or sports supplements like proteins, shakes, bars, energy complexes, gels, things like that. And also detox or digestive health supplements such as enzymes, probiotics, following a detox protocol or a cleanse, things like that. It's totally based on your personal choice. And it's also based on your current and your desired lifestyle and goals. So if you're currently a couch potato and you want to become an athlete, you may want to look into some nutritional supplements, some training and sports supplements, possibly even some weight loss supplements. If you're concerned about the detoxification of your body, you may want to look into some detox and digestive health supplements. It's largely a personal choice, but always, always, always get the best that you can afford. You want quality over quantity. Simply don't be cheap with your health. Never, never cheat yourself on your health. And finally, just want to cover this really quick. There are certain special populations of people where they need to make certain dietary considerations. These are in conditions like celiac disease, or people who have a high level of gluten intolerance, people with diabetes or heart conditions, those with neuropathic diseases and disorders or autoimmune conditions or digestive conditions, inflammatory conditions, people who are undergoing cancer treatment or in recovery from cancer treatment. These are generally situations where nutrition is being carefully monitored by a doctor or a specialist of some kind, and dietary considerations have to be made in these circumstances. There are also other dietary considerations to be made, such as common food allergies like dairy, soy, eggs, peanuts, tree nuts, shellfish, and strawberries. So if you know anybody with a food allergy, you want to be very considerate and make sure that any food that you serve them or share with them does not contain these food allergens. It can be deadly to them. There are certain parts of the population that can't handle FODMAPs. This is fructo, oligo, di, mono, and polysaccharides. There's certain types of sugar, also oxalates, and there's a condition called phenylketonuria, otherwise known as PKU. This is a fairly rare condition, but if you know somebody who has it, once again, make sure you're cognizant of it and that you're considerate of it. And finally, there are interactions with medications or certain treatment protocols that can be affected by your dietary intake. For example, if you've ever seen an ad for certain antidepressants, they say don't consume grapefruit while taking this medication. There's a reason for that. It's because there's an interaction between the compounds in grapefruit and the compounds in this antidepressant. So you want to keep things like that in mind, especially if somebody you know or yourself has any of these circumstances, any of these conditions. You want to make sure that you're not serving them foods that are going to make their condition worse, or at the very least, render their treatments ineffective. So that does it for this half of my webinar. I'm going to switch back to video screen here. All right. Okay. So it looks like that half of the webinar is done and good to go. Part 2 of the webinar, like I've been saying, is going to focus on our food system and the toxicity in our diet, and also how there is a better way. So I want to say thank you very much for joining me today in my Nutrition 101 webinar part 1. I hope it was informative. As always, make sure that you're doing your own research, that you're following up with your own questions. If you have any questions for me, you can totally post them in the comments underneath this video. It'll be available on YouTube. So thank you very much for joining me today, and hope to see you in part 2 of the webinar. Until then, have yourself a great day and rock.